Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, the Quranic concept of Allah and the human self. That is the topic for our presentation today. I have noted some references, particularly two references are important with respect to this topic, the human self and Allah by Ghulam Ahmad Parvez, the human self and Iblis, again by Allama Parvez. And these cover a lot of details on this subject, and if anyone wants more details, can go through these books. For contact, this is our number in case there is any query or question. Before sharing our main talk, one fundamental point needing our attention. The Quran tells us that Allah, who created all things, is also the one who has provided ways and means for their sustenance. Creation and guidance are both from Allah. Ta'ala Rabbuna allazi ata kulla shay'in khalqahu summa hada. I quoted this verse here from Surah Taha. Moses said to Pharaoh that our Rabb is he who creates everything and then communicates to it that path by treading on which it can reach its desired destination. To human beings, this guidance arrives via Wahi, that is the revelation with which we have come to you. So this is a sort of a dialogue when Hazrat Musa, he went to Pharaoh and told him that let Bani Israel go with him. And he made it clear to him that this is what is the purpose of the creation, that first Allah created man and of course everything in the universe, and then also provided them guidance. But in the case of man, this comes through the revelation because we have choice and intent, and as a consequence we do not have guidance within our own selves, so we need external guidance but as a choice. That is, we can follow our desires and live with the consequences of following those desires, or we follow the path of the Wahi. And this is the central point of today's presentation. I've quoted next two verses, Allazi khalaqa fasawwa wallazi qaddara fahada. Allah is he who provides a form to everything through different amalgamations and arrangements. Then by removing its additions and extras, creates specific proportion and balance in it. The word fasawwa used here in the first verse is has within it the proportion and balance. And we can look at other meanings of this term in Lughatul Quran. But what is important over here is that what Quran is saying, that we went through certain, human beings went through a certain evolutionary process with other things of the world, and then reached a stage where proportion and balance was introduced in them. And this all followed the law of evolution. Then adds a potential in it according to a specific estimate and scale for growth, flourishing, and reaching a state. This is called the taqdeer of this thing. And we see the manifestation of this all around us. For example, fruit trees, they start from a seed which has all the potential of becoming that tree, and then it grows and then it starts bearing fruit. Same goes for human body, for example. It reaches a stage where it becomes a child and then it grows further, becomes adulthood, and then grows old and dies. So this is all a process through which each species has reached its intended destination. But in the case of man, since we have a self, which we'll be talking about a little later, we need external guidance. And that is where this thing comes in, Wallazi qaddara fahada. That Allah gave balance and proportion to every creation and then guided it. And in animals, guidance is as instincts within them. They don't have choice and intent. After this, he shows it that path by treading on which that thing can reach its completion. This guidance is kept in everything of the universe. This is called the nature of this thing or its instinct. In this way, everything of the universe, according to the law of Allah, from its starting point, stage by stage, reaches its point of completion. This is called the system of Rububiyyat. So Quran calls it Rububiyyat because everything has a certain destination defined for it. And in the case of man, since our life goes beyond death, So our destination is essentially to develop ourselves. And with that development, all our latent potentials which have been kept within us, those keep developing and growing. And we are, of course, on the way benefit as well. The way we should look at our life and the life around us is that it is not at random, it is not by chance. It has a specific purpose and it is very precise and accurate. And wherever we wherever we can find, we will see that the laws are working behind it. And finding out and discovering these laws is part of our responsibility as human beings. What is covered in today's talk? Following three aspects will be discussed briefly: the issues before us in the world which need our attention in relation to bringing a change within our psyche. Because we have seen that in the world there is a cause and effect, the law of cause and effect working. So if we see certain things which are not good or something is bad, then we should look for the causes behind it. And that is part of the cognitive ability which is given to us. How do we understand the human self and its need for a model? How can the Quran help us to come to terms with the concept of Allah described in it and its relation to the development of the human self? There will be overlapping points, but main focus is that we have a self, we have choice and intent, and the world in which we are living, how do we change it? But before changing the world, we need to change our own self. The Quran has declared, لَقَدْ أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ كِتَابًا فِيهِ ذِكْرُكُمْ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Surely we have sent down for you a book in which is zikrukum. And kum, when Quran says you, it is addressing the whole of mankind. It is not making any exception. And that is important to understand. And dhikr over here means mention, eminence, consigning to memory, admonishing. So Quran is saying that what is contained in this book is a guidance so that you can make optimum choices and live a happy life which is free from fear and huzn. And if you do not follow the Quran, of course, the world which we see all around us is the one which is based on non-Quranic values. So zikrukum, and of course Quran has also mentioned zikrullah, and that zikrullah, that is mentioning of Allah, and in whatever context Allah has mentioned himself in the Quran, we have to see it that how can we draw benefits, how it is applicable to our own self. Will you not use your intellect? And it's interesting that in a question form, Quran has said, Afala taqilun, that you have intellect and you need to improve the horizon and the expense of this intellect so that you can understand what is going on around you in the world and also what is given in the Quran, and you can figure it out yourself that Quran is for our own benefit, for increasing our own eminence, for increasing our own understanding in the world so that we can live a better life. And to come to terms with this aspect. So in a way, Quran helps us to develop our intellect. And as our intellect keeps developing, the Quran keeps exposing its every aspect which can help to establish the system of deen. Are we satisfied with the world around us? If not, then what is the solution? Over here, I have taken some photos from Google, and I thought that this will set the scene right. Here are two children who are standing on a heap of rubbish, and they are looking at the slums, probably their own homes. And here is a family which is sitting outside a temporary arrangement, some kind of a tent. And a lot of human beings, they live like that for whole of their life. And then is the question that who is responsible for that? And over here, there is a destruction caused by human hands for no fault, just because these guys were weak and maybe there were some natural resources in their land. So the powerful have destroyed their living. And this is another devastating scene from recent wars. And over here, there is a phrase written by someone: "End poverty to stop crime, greed is deadly." So whichever human being has written this, of course, he or she understands what poverty is and how it is leading to crime in many parts of the world. And greed is deadly. Why people are greedy? And this is another question for us to look at. that when people are not following the path of the Quran, this is the situation with those who are in power. And these are the floods which, and these human beings are now going through that flooding water because everything they had has been taken away by the water. And this is important to understand. Why do they suffer? Who is going to take care of them? And this is another scene of flooding. But the same human beings who are controlling the world, they know quite well how to construct palaces and mosques and temples and these kind of things. And we can look at. So this is just to these pictures provide a contrast in human behavior. We can compare it and then think through the issues. This is a presidential house for one man, and we can see that these people who are supposed to look after these people whose photographs I've given over here, shared over here, and why do they do this but not take care of these people? And this is an aircraft carrier, so we can see the weapons of mass destruction and how much military industrial complex is growing and developing in the world, while all these problems are not being solved. Rather, they are contributing to these problems. And then there is a climate agenda which is going on in today's world, and nobody talks of poverty, but they talk of climate because there is an agenda behind it, and we need to look into it, study it, and see for ourselves based on data what is the situation, what they are trying to project. It is not just listening to it and get carried away. No, the Quran is saying, Afala taqilun, you have to use your head, you have to use your intellect, because the more we use the intellect, the more we become wiser. And that is one of the attributes of Allah, to become Hakim. Eradication of poverty, we can see a lot of conferences take place across the world. People do talk of that as well. People in power also talk about it. But they are the ones who know they are creating poverty, but it is just to cover it up. These people get together, read out their papers, and then everyone forgets about it. And this is a sort of a social club of rich people and those so-called intellectuals. And if we go on to the website of World Bank, you will see there's a lot written on eradication of poverty. And we can see in the world poverty is in fact increasing. The gap between rich and poor is increasing. Now let us look at the issues before us in relation to the concept of Allah. The world around us is created by human intellect, and presently the Western powers are the ones who are controlling the world. And the problems which it has deliberately created are never going to be resolved. If these are to be resolved, then why did it create these in the first place? And this verse 285, we can have a look on that in which Allah says that first you turn people out of their homes, then as a charitable deed, you go and get them back into their homes, whereas you shouldn't have turned them out of their houses in the first place. And this is going on right in front of us. First we destroy their houses, and then these NGOs arrive to give them some kind of a charity and try to help them. The question which we need to ask ourselves is this world as it is acceptable to us? If the answer is a resounding yes, then we do not really need the concept of Allah given in the Quran. It is that simple. Now this is a statement which I put down because it looks apparently very harsh, but it is a fact. If we see around people who are studying the Quran academically as well, they seldom talk about poverty and seldom talk about solving the problems. And they will keep praising the language of the Quran, they will keep praising each word, they will look at every aspect of it, but will never talk of human accountability and solving human issues. And hereafter will never come into it. And this is we can figure it out ourselves. Just listen to, there's so many presentations on the Quran on, for example, YouTube. Listen to it and figure it out for yourself. The Quran stated clearly and emphatically that nothing changes in the human world collectively until human beings change their psyche. Inna Allaha la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim. And over here Quran says that Allah will not change the state of a nation until they change what is within themselves. Now, as a permanent value, this is, we can see to it that any nation which is on planet, whatever they are doing, there is a collective psyche behind it, particularly the psyche of the people who are controlling that land. Over here, interesting is that Quran has said, "Inna Allah." So if we want Allah to be part of that nation, and that is, i.e., the system of deen, then we will have to bring in the concept of Allah given in the Quran and the permanent values. If we wish the world around us to be that to which the Quran has pointed, then we need to bring a change within our psyche in line with the guidance of Allah. Now, the issue before us is what needs to be changed within us and what exactly is the procedure and process by which we can bring about that change. That change which can help firstly to understand the world and secondly to take steps to change it for the better. Another verse of interest here related to this topic is the question of human accountability. Quran says, وَخَلَقَ اللَّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بِالْحَقِّ وَلِتُجْزَى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. Over here, very important, first the Quran says, خَلَقَ اللَّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بِالْحَقِّ, that Allah has created the heavens and the earth as haq. And haq means for constructive results. So if there are destructive results, then we are not in harmony with what Allah wants us to do. Kullu nafsin bima kasabat, so that every self, nafs over here will be taken as human self, because that is where the accountability is. We cannot do any deed unless we first think about it. So at our thought level, whatever we are doing, that impacts on ourself, on our personality, on our sense of being. And we are accountable for whatever we do. The world is not created at random and not without a purpose. And then Quran says, وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ, so that no injustice is done to anyone. It also implies this accountability. This is called law of requital. It also implies that if we establish a system, we should ensure that no injustice is done to anyone in that land, in that system. And this is very important because this should become part of our own self. So this law of mukafat, we should keep it in mind all the time, that we are accountable for whatever we do. And the world which we have created around us, if it is not a good world, that means our psyche is not good enough to create a better world. So this is the point which I was trying to make. This verse outlines the law of mukafat or requital, i.e., each self is accountable for its own deeds, and this is the purpose of human creation. I.e., each one of us is accountable for everything we do in this worldly life. People talk about, many times we see that they say that what is the purpose of life? It is meaningless, and there is so much misery in the world, and where is God? And these kind of things people speak. But these are those people who do not wish to solve the problems. They are in fact part of the problem, and we can figure it out ourselves by looking at their conduct. Now the question which comes before us is that if I am responsible for whatever I do, and the world around us is created by our deeds as mankind, then what is the role of Allah in this? Why do we wish to explore this topic in the Quran? The world around us is not acceptable as it is full of fear and anxiety, and we are not happy with this state of affairs. We question our own existence and the purpose of our creation and do not find a rational and appealing explanation. All the concepts of gods in various religions do not lead to bringing about that change within me, which can lead to forming that psyche, which can then help to create that evidence-based conviction, whereby I can see the true reality of my creation and existence. Can I get evidence of the hereafter? This is important, that unless we tread on this path, we cannot understand the significance of the life of the hereafter. And this is important because the question which we ask about the hereafter is at the level of ourself. And the self itself has the key to finding that answer. If Allah exists, then why does He allow so much misery and injustice to exist in the world? Very important question which we need to answer, because people do ask us at times that why Allah has created so much misery in the world. And they are the ones who do not wish to find out wherever there is a misery in the world, there is a human hand behind it. And wherever there is a solution, there is a human hand behind it. And we have to find out that how Allah functions in our world through His laws. Since He does not appear to interfere in the human world, what exactly is His role in relation to mankind? Can the Quran throw some light on this and provide a logical and rational explanation for this whole state of affairs? Yes, Quran provides extremely rational explanation of everything which goes on in the human world. The only thing is we have to approach it with an unbiased mind, not with our own biases and with our own. We arrive in this world with choice and intent. Some deny it, of course. They don't want to take responsibility, but the same people who deny it glaringly make their own choices, because when they are denying it, they are also making a choice to deny it and mostly conform to the environment in which we live. We acquire certain beliefs, and these affect the way in which we live our life. Our choices are related to achieving successes in the physical world and its benefits. Over here, I have put inverted commas to successes. The reason is that if we ask people in the world, how do they define success? Mostly it will be confined to the material achievements or material acquisition of material needs in the world. We go through a physical cycle of our life and then die. Why do we die, and is our death the end of our life? Why physical death is universal? We see in the world that everything goes through a cycle. Trees go through a cycle, animals go through a cycle, animals die and the new come in through the process of reproduction. And same goes for our physical body. And this is something which we should keep it in mind, that when we are born into this life, we are a new individual with our own new self, or a clean slate on which nothing is written. And as we live our life, then we create our own self. Some think there is a life beyond our physical death. Can the Quran provide more details about our life in the hereafter? Can the concept of Allah as given in the Quran lead to providing assurance of the life of the hereafter? Can this be explained rationally and logically based on evidence? All of this is explained in the Quran. In today's presentation, we will restrict ourselves primarily to the relationship between human self and the concept of Allah given in the Quran. But there is a lot more to it, as we know, and the books which I have referred above, these have all the details. And of course, we have to use our intellect to find out the details. Basically, we should look at our own self and its inner state of development, and the answers will come before us logically and rationally as we keep progressing in life. What is the issue facing us as human beings? If Allah exists as noted in the Quran, then how does He view human creation, its purpose of life, and is human physical existence going to end with physical death? As far as acknowledgement of the existence of God is concerned, more or less every human being recognizes the presence of some higher entity, which is the probable cause for the creation of this well-organized universe. We can ask anyone, and when we look at the universe around us, all of them, even atheists, cannot go away from this fact that there is some kind of entity, some kind of creator behind the whole creation. And this is very logical. And even those people who say that they do not believe in any kind of God, they will also say that there is a nature and there are laws working in our life. And they try to get maximum benefits from the knowledge of working of these laws. As far as acknowledgement of the existence of God is concerned, more or less every human being recognizes the presence of some higher entity, which is the probable cause for the creation of this well-organized universe. The question before us is, what is the purpose of human creation put forward by Allah in His book, the Quran? Let us look at one verse of the Quran. So that is the thing before us. Otherwise, saying that I believe in God, it makes no difference, unless it changes our behavior, it changes the world in which we live through our own hands. And that is the question which we should try to answer. وَهُوَ الَّذِي فِي السَّمَاءِ إِلَٰهٌ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَٰهٌ وَهُوَ الْحَكِيمُ الْعَلِيمُ. It is He who is Ilah in the heavens and is Ilah in the earth, and He is Hakim and Alim. Ilah over here will mean the someone whose laws, whose subjugation, whose rule you accept, and of course willingly. And sometimes you have to accept them unwillingly as well, because in a man-made world, Since we are on this planet, we have to accept their laws till the time the system of deen is established. So over here, what Quran is saying is that Allah is Ilah in the outer world, and it is a fact. Whether you accept it or not, the whole universe is functioning and is manifesting enough evidence for the existence of Allah. And it is functioning extremely well. There are a lot of YouTube videos which we can watch where they say that whole universe is very finely tuned and is absolutely perfect for the existence of human beings with a freedom to choose and with an intent. Now this is important, where Quran says that if you accept his functioning of all his laws in the outer world, if you bring those within your own system, then all this chaos and conflict will disappear. Accepting him as God in the outer world is linked to accepting him as sovereign, as ruler within human affairs, i.e. becoming a subject under the system of deen. This will help to obtain the benefits of his being Hakim and Alim. And of course, we have to become Hakim and Alim as well. When we use the values of the Quran rationally as those are given and explained, then we also become wise and we of course become knowledgeable. Today's talk should be viewed with this in mind, that what kind of human self will emerge by making Allah's self as a model, and how this transformed self can then help to understand the deen of the Quran and the need for its establishment in order to release humanity from man-made chains. Now, these chains have to be recognized as well. If we look around and look at the concept of Allah given by the Quran, which is based on fact, because there is an evidence before us that this whole universe is finely tuned. And if we follow those values and rationally understand them, then we will also come to this conclusion that by following these values, we can create a system which will be free from fear and grief and huzen. So the point over here is that firstly, we have to recognize these chains. And we recognize those because we, as students of the Quran, have left them behind and we have got rid of them. And the freedom which we are enjoying now, that freedom is adequate to understand what Quran is trying to tell us regarding the system of deen. And that is very important, because if our minds are contaminated and these are chained, then we will not be able to understand what Quran is trying to convey to us. And this is an important point here. I've already stated a few sentences on Ilah, but over here what I've done is I've taken it from Lugat. And this is the root of Ilah. The basic meaning is to accept someone's subjugation. And this is important. We should keep it in mind that what Ilahs are working in the world. And every nation has its own Ilah. Ilahun would mean someone whose refuge may be sought in danger, or someone who can be requested to save one from difficulties, and the concept of whose loftiness surprises one. Ilah would mean a being whose rules must be accepted and whose laws must be followed and obeyed. So all those people who are in power at the moment in different countries, they are Ilah of those who are following them, on whom their laws are applicable. So this makes it clear. So when we make Allah as Ilah, it will mean that we accept His values, His laws, His attributes for our guidance. And that means then He becomes Ilah, and when we follow that Ilah, then He is Allah of the Quran. And that is the way we should view it. Now there are a few verses over here which will make this point very clear. Now this is the pronouncement by Pharaoh. قَالَ لَإِنَّ اتَّخَذْتَ إِلَهًا غَيْرِي لَأَجْعَلَنَّكَ مِنَ الْمَسْجُونِينَ. Pharaoh said to his people, if you do put forward any Ilah other than me. Be very clear, Quran doesn't leave any ambiguity. It says that if you follow any other law, that is the land in which you people are living and you are my subjects, and I am your boss, I am your God, then I will certainly put you in prison. So you cannot go against my laws. And that is important because he wanted them to obey him. And he enjoyed, of course, wielding power. And next one is Araita man ittakhadha ilahahu hawahu fa anta takunu alayhi wakila. See you such a one as takes for his ilah his own passion or desires. You be a wakil for him. Now, this is important that we should understand that what Quran is saying, people follow their desires and actually they make their desires as their God, as their Allah. And that is why somebody asked me that could you put down something whether God exists or not. I said the question should be what kind of a God we want, and then we create one and then follow it. So our desires can create any God. We can justify anything in the world. So these two verses put ample light on Allah as a term, as a word used in the Quran. So anything which we create as a God and whose laws we follow, whether we physically follow or we follow mentally. For example, in religion, people follow gods which they make out of different saints and holy men and elders and scholars, and all these entities are become their gods. And we can see examples of these everywhere. The divine self called Allah. Now let us look at this word Allah. How did it come into being? The Quran has used the word Allah for the divine self. Allah is the name of the self of God, the description of whose attributes is spread throughout the pages of Quran like sparkling pearls. So wherever Allah is used, it is used with all his attributes. So for example, when we recite Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, it means Allah with all his attributes at the beginning. So I'm starting the Quran or I'm starting this verse with Allah with all his attributes, and then Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim will be related to nourishment and development of the creation of Allah. So these things will become clearer as we go through the Quran and understand the concept of Allah. For example, we say that Allah is Rahim, Allah is Kareem. So Rahimi and Kareemi are attributes of Allah. The view of most about this word Allah is that it is in fact a combination of Al-Ilahun. We have seen Ilahun and now Al-Ilahun, the Ilah. Through frequent usage, the word has gradually evolved to become Allah from Allah, Al-Ilahun. In the Arabic language, by prefixing Al, a common noun becomes a proper noun. From this perspective, the meaning of Allah will be that particular Ilah whose concept the Quran has put forward. The focal point of Quranic teaching is La ilaha illallah. We hear this term quite frequently. There is no ilah but Allah, i.e. there is no such being, no such power in the universe which can be acknowledged as Allah. Such a being is only the one who is called Allah by the Quran. This then means that it is only the law of Allah which is such whose obedience should be adhered to in the universe, for whom means of protection should be sought, who should be made a shield for all troubles and difficulties. So it is important that our mind, we have seen that our psyche is the one, the nature of our psyche is the one which decides that how do we behave in the practical world. So our outer world is based on the collective psyche of people at that point in time. So La ilaha means that we should not have any other ilah in our head, in our consciousness, except Allah the way He has explained Himself. And what is explained in the Quran, we should keep it in mind. It is a fact. It exists. It is not something arbitrary or some assumption that which can go wrong as well. The hereafter of the Quran exists. The permanent values are the ones which are immutable, and these are evidence-based. Their immutability is based on evidence. And Allah's attributes are a fact. And the moment we manifest those attributes, particularly which are related to our character and our conduct, we see the results within our own self and also in the outer world where we conduct ourselves. So these are not arbitrary things that something is put together and that these will not produce their evidence and results before us. So whatever is noted in the Quran is a fact. What constitutes a human being? Human beings possess an I, together with its consciousness, which makes it aware of oneself. Our sense of I remains with us throughout our physical life. And we can check it. Our own sense of identity has never changed from childhood to whatever age we are at this point in time when we are listening to this presentation. Our sense of identity has not changed. Because if it changes, then we cannot live our life in this world, because if tomorrow, if I make a commitment with someone and he comes to me and I say, no, I'm not the same person, then that commitment will not stand. So divine energy, which is given to us by virtue of which we have a self and we have choice and intent, does not change in terms of its identity. But our sense of being does change. So we should be able to differentiate between the two. Because while our sense of identity does not change, as we live our life and do deeds, then those deeds become part of our memory and that becomes part of our consciousness. Through the possession of this I, we have choice and intent. The world around us is the creation of this attribute. The universe owes its meaning and creation to this I. There is another point over here is that this universe will be meaningless if human beings are not around. I'm presenting this presentation or talk because I have intellect, I have metacognitive abilities, and I'm the one who is putting meanings to every word over here. If somebody else reads it, he or she can put their own meanings as well because we have a choice and intent. And in the world, this whole universe will be meaningless if there were no human beings. Animals are not going to make any meaning, any impression out of this world. So that should be at the back of our mind that we are here in this world for a finite time, number one, and we give meaning to this universe and we give meaning to everything which we do in this life. All experiences of life take place within this consciousness or through this consciousness, and we can test it. Mind, which is intellect, provides the ability to think about thinking, metacognitive ability. Animals also think, but they do not have the metacognitive ability because, for example, if a cat goes around some obstacle, then she thought about it and she saw it as an obstruction, but she does not know why did she do it. Whereas human beings figure it out that why did they do it. So that why is the one which comes out, which gets answered through our metacognitive ability. Mind also gives rise to our subconscious. And you also are listening to this presentation at the same time, metacognitively looking at it, that what exactly is being said. We have desires, some arise automatically, while others we give birth to ourselves. So there are deliberate desires which we create ourselves. For example, we feel hungry, we create a desire that what am I going to eat. But some desires, of course, they arise within us due to environment around us. For example, if we have seen a nice car, then we might like to desire to buy one like that. So this is a desire which was not there. We did not create it. We got prompted because we saw a beautiful, nice car. We have emotions and feelings together with motivation. We have memory, the ability to remember and store information. We should keep it in mind that during our education and training and learning, we consign everything to our memory and we can then utilize it later on. We have a body which interacts with our cognitive ability in both ways. Physical death is inbuilt within our initial makeup and all human beings are going to die at some point in life. There has been a lot of efforts to somehow make ourselves, our body as immortal in this world. This will never succeed. The reason is that death is inbuilt within those two cells which came together. And this is to which the Quran is drawing our attention as well, because that is our qadr, that is the qadr of our physical body. And if we are going to die, it is better to figure it out that what exactly is the meaning of our existence as a human being. What is my value as a human being? So that is the point at which we should concentrate. Whatever we do while living our life affects both our body and consciousness. Two quotes from the Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, and that is written by Allama Iqbal. These are his lectures, and it is worth going through them. They are a bit difficult, but if we go through them a few times and concentrate on what he has written, there is a lot in it and for ourselves. No doubt the emergence of egos endowed with the power of spontaneous and hence unforeseeable action is in a sense a limitation on the freedom of the all-inclusive ego. Allama Iqbal has used ego, or in Urdu khudi, as a word for human self or nafs. Over here, what he's saying is that egos, that is human self with choice and intent, is in fact puts a great limitation on the freedom of the all-inclusive ego. All-inclusive ego is Allah. That Allah did create human beings, and the human beings in the world do put some limitation on His freedom, because He has allowed us to carry on for a finite time on this world, and through the law of requital see what do we do. And this is an important point to understand, that Allah has deliberately created us with choice and intent and allow us that freedom so that we can see the consequences of what we do. But this limitation is not externally imposed. That is, Allah did not impose it externally, He decided to do it. So He made a choice as well, because Allah also has a self. It is born out of His own freedom, whereby He has chosen finite egos to the participators of His life, power and freedom. In the Quran, the word nafs is used for human beings as well as for Allah Himself. So we should keep it in mind that how important we are as a creation to possess a self which also makes decisions just like Allah, choice and intent. Whereas Allah has Himself made it compulsory on Himself to follow His own laws. My pleasures, pains, and desires are exclusively mine, forming part and parcel of my private ego alone. My feelings, hates, and loves, judgments, and resolutions are exclusively mine. God Himself cannot feel, judge, and choose for me. Made it very clear, and Quran has clearly said that you are responsible for your own deeds and for your own thoughts. Just be aware that whatever thoughts you have, Allah is aware of them, which means that our thoughts and our deeds leave an impact on our personality. And we can check each of these things, our feelings, hates, and loves. For example, if I have a toothache, nobody can take it away. It is part of me and I have to deal with it. What is the nature of I? Inner experience is the ego at work. We appreciate the ego itself in the act of perceiving, judging, and willing. The life of the ego is a kind of tension caused by the ego invading the environment and environment invading the ego. The ego does not stand outside the arena of mutual invasion. It is present in it as a directive energy and is formed and disciplined by its own experience. Over here, what he's saying is that we interact with our environment, and whatever we do in this life, that is how our I works. That is how our self functions in this life. And we cannot go outside this interacting environment. We are on this planet, we have to interact with other human beings and also with our physical environment in which we live. What we do is that we have directive energy. So in whatever sphere where we are living, we use that energy to get things moving. For example, in the case of this presentation, I'm talking and I'm using my metacognitive abilities to get it recorded and then share it with all of you. And through this directive energy and through the discipline which I follow within certain values, that is the one which helps to develop myself. Thus, my real personality is not a thing, it is an act. So it is not something airy-fairy and abstract. Our personality is the one which is acting in the outer world and producing its consequences. My experience is only a series of acts, beautifully put, held together by the unity of a directive purpose. So this is the important point over here, that we have to have a directive purpose. If I am here, what is the purpose of my life? Is my purpose of life will end with my death, or is it long enough and strong enough to go beyond my death? And that is the point which we have to keep it in mind, because Quran has provided the choice of the hereafter before us, that if we live our life with hereafter in the mind, which is a fact explained by the Quran, then we have a choice. But if we say 100% that there is no life beyond death, then essentially we have eliminated one choice which the Quran has provided to us. And if I say that my life will end with death, essentially I have refused to accept any self within me. I have made it clear to myself that my body is defining me, and since the brain dies at the time of death, hence there is no possibility of another life beyond my death. And which means that I am not concentrating on the development of myself, which has the ability and potential to go beyond that. My whole reality lies in my directive attitude. You must interpret, understand, and appreciate me in my judgments, in my will, attitudes, aims, and aspirations. See over here, he says that if somebody else is trying to judge somebody else or look at the personality of someone else, then they can see the way people behave. So it is not the words which matter. Of course, words matter as well, because then we can look at that. The Quran says, "Lama taquluna ma la taf'alun," that don't say things which you are not going to do. The point over here is that through the conduct, we should figure out how the person is thinking. And this is where Quran gives us the ability, the intellectual ability to be able to do that and do it very effectively. This will be a very important part of education and training of children under the system of Deen. Life offers a scope for ego activity, and that is the first test of the synthetic activity of the ego. Very nicely and comprehensively put together in one sentence, life offers a scope for ego activity. So this arena of life, a world in which we are living, it is giving us the opportunity to make a decision where we want to end up after our physical death, and where we want to end up even in the later part of life, right in this world. And that is the one which will decide that the choices which we made here, whether we are successful according to those choices, the efforts which we have made, have we achieved it? And that is important. And that is the first test of the synthetic activity of the ego. So this is stage one for us. And there is far more to come, because our life is literally eternal after our death. There are no pleasure-giving and pain-giving acts. There are only ego-sustaining and ego-dissolving acts. It is the deed that prepares the ego for dissolution or disciplines him for a future career. So what Iqbal has noted is very correctly and factually that in life there are no pleasure-giving acts or deeds and pain-giving deeds. Everything is accounted for, and our deeds decide whether our self develops or our self degrades. And this is the part of the law of requital explained in the Quran. Quran has made it very clear that on the day of judgment, our human beings none of them will be able to say that injustice has been done to me, because whole of the scroll of his deeds will be right in front of him. So we are a witness against our own self. If we look at our memory, we can find out where did we go wrong. And in fact, after coming to the Quran, we realize the errors of judgment which we made in the previous phase of our life when we were not guided by the Quran. So the question for us is that which belief can help us to bring out our best in this life? So that is the point we should keep it in mind, that Quran is helping us to bring out those latent potentials which can only be brought out by accepting Allah exactly the way the Quran has explained him, that is through his attributes. Otherwise, if we do not acquire that concept of Allah which is given in the Quran, then those latent potentials will never manifest themselves as attributes given in the Quran. Keeping few aspects in view regarding the human self, Allah has a personality and man also has a personality. It should be clear that the self of the man is bestowed on him by Allah and is not part of the self of Allah. Personality is an indivisible unity which cannot be divided into parts. Wherever there is a personality, that is self, nafs, ego, whatever we wish to call it, its basic characteristics will be the same. Since the personality of Allah is the most complete and highest self, therefore its attributes and traits are also the most complete and highest. The Quran denotes these as Lahul Asma'ul Husna. These are the different aspects of this self. Remember, Adam has the potential of Wallama Adam al Asma'a Kullaha, ability to characterize things of the universe. So what Quran is saying is that Allah has balanced attributes, and which are in extremely developed forms, and those serve as a model for us. And whatever, wherever. That is why it is important. And when we are reading through the Quran or studying it, we see that what attributes are being referred in various verses. And those will give clue to what we should become, how we are going to manifest, and how to act on those values which are being discussed on those verses. The human self in its miniature form in comparison with the divine self is finite. Therefore, its attributes are finite in comparison with the divine attributes. While we say finite, the Quran has not defined their upper limits, that you cannot become this or that. That is why Quran presents the examples of, for example, the Messenger Ibrahim (Islam) and Rasulullah (sallallahu as models for us. That means that we can become like them by following the Quran. And whatever attributes they manifested, the procedure is given in the Quran. And same goes for the hereafter. When Quran talks of the hereafter, it does not say that your journey will end at a point. It says, Hum fiya khalidun, they will live over there, they will abode over there forever and ever and ever. The human self in its miniature form in comparison with the divine self is finite, therefore its attributes are finite in comparison with the divine attributes. The potential for all these attributes is present, which are termed as Al-Asma'ul Husna in relation to Allah, accepting those attributes which are related to Allah's infiniteness. We can look at the root of Ism as well, which is essentially related to attributes and characteristics, and of course name as well, because if we assign a particular name to something, it will be based on the properties and characteristics of those things. And human beings have the ability to name things, because if we do not name, we cannot use those things. In order to use those things, we have to name them, and from their names, we recognize their characteristics, properties, attributes. In the human self, these attributes are present as realizable possibilities or in a latent form. The manifesting or actualizing of these is the purpose of human life. This is in essence what is termed as development of the human self. And now if we go back to that verse where law of requital is stated, we should keep it in mind that we should do those deeds so that our realizable potentials come out. So law of requital says that whatever we do, we will have the consequences of it. So if we do all those deeds which manifest different attributes which are given in the Quran, that means those potentials which are kept within us will start manifesting themselves in our personality, and then others will also recognize. And that is how a society develops, a society evolves, a society grows, and that is how the system of deen becomes implemented. It is necessary for a self which is at a lower level that it should keep some higher self as a standard in front of it for its development. Very important point. Since we have a self, if I keep another human being who has also got a self as my model, then how am I going to develop? Because that human being will also be struggling to find some kind of a model before him or her. And if every human being is making other human being a model, then we will find the world the way it is as of today, because most human beings are conforming to those who are at the helm of power and control in the world, and their laws are being followed. And this is the mess we are creating. But if I have a self and I have an infinite self in front of me, then that is the correct model for me. And this is the reason human beings have been created. And this is the emphasis of the Quran right from beginning till the end. And Quran says that Allah is on Sirat al-Mustaqim, which means we get onto Sirat al-Mustaqim, and Sirat al-Mustaqim means that path which is straight and also well established and well balanced. And we can figure it out ourselves by using our rational side and our reasoning. And Quran helps us to figure it out very clearly, leaves no doubt. That's why Quran says, La raiba fihi. So no suspicion and doubt remains, no skepticism remains once we follow the Quran. Keeping the divine attributes as a standard in front of oneself and declaring the manifestation of these in oneself as being the purpose of life is called Eimaan in Allah. So Quran has explained itself that what is Eimaan in Allah, and we will look at one verse later on. The human self and the physical body. The human self is the highest permanent value. The remainder of the values become the means for its development, and when strength is developed in it, then these values keep sprouting and rising automatically from it like the rays of the sun. We can say that the human self in itself, because it's an entity at which other permanent values we are discussing, that it may not be a permanent value. But it becomes a permanent value once we accept Allah as a value in front of us, because then it becomes eternal. It starts developing. And this is something which we should think through. It should be made clear that this does not mean that the human body has no worth or value. Human body has extremely important role to play in the development of self and making this life worth a while. And if we want to eliminate huzn and fear, then we have to take care of the body as well. According to the Quran, human bodies, i.e. human physical life and its means of sustenance, have their own values which need to be protected, but these values are relative, not permanent. So out of taking care of our physical body by keeping it healthy, keeping it strong, and making sure that it lives as long as possible so that we can keep developing ourselves and create a paradise on this earth through the system of deen. When there is a clash between the interests of physical life and the human self, then for the protection of the interests of the human self, physical life and its interests should be sacrificed. And that is an important point, that at the back of our head, we should be always clear. We should keep it in mind that physical body has its own significance. But what is important is the development of our inner self, and which has to be, we should keep those permanent values in mind. And wherever there is a question of sacrifice comes, then we should never ever compromise on the permanent values. Human life is about making choices. Is there a criteria to make the best choice? That choice it takes into account the life of the hereafter. Over here, I have drawn a simple schematic just to illustrate this point. These four figures. These represent mankind, and they are following the path without wahi. And as they follow, they become ready for departure. That is, the death time arrives. This path ends in physical death. Now see that there is no guidance over here. They are following their own desires, and they are conforming to the majority in the world, and that is how they have lived their life. So the question of self never arose in their mind. And what happens then is further development not possible, as these people do not meet the criteria of this stage, which is given in the Quran, i.e. hereafter as defined by the Quran. So their self will not be that self which is required for the life of the hereafter. And that is something which we should keep it in mind. Average span of human physical existence on the planet is enough for us to live a life which can become meaningful. Of course, it is important if in the world every house had access to the Quran and was explained to them the way we are now dealing with it as a system of deen, then it is possible that more people would have made a choice to come towards the Quran. And someone who is looking for guidance then decides that I'm not going to be part of it. I would like to follow a different path. I'm not satisfied with the world which is created by human intellect, as we have already pointed to initially. And then they join with others. And this is inbuilt in the guidance of the Quran, that the moment we acquire Eimaan and we do solid deeds and develop our potentials, as these potentials come out, we seek for some people who are also in this path, and then we come together, remove our differences, and then that is how a Jamaat is formed. And then they work together towards the system of deen. Now, nafs experiences physical death. At this point, what happens is, whether the system is established or not, but their self is developed, and then followers of Sirat al-Mustaqim leave physical life at a higher plane of existence. And this state of theirs is very clearly defined within the Quran. This is based on science. It is not otherworldly, or there is no way we can check it. We can check it, and that is the whole purpose of the Quran, not to leave any ambiguity. And important thing is that all our life we should be aiming for the system of deen. an eminent self meeting the minimum threshold level of the Quranic criteria. And Quran has pointed to this. Why do we need a model in our life? We spend life between real self, ideal self, and ought self. I've taken this term from modern psychology. There are different models presented in modern psychology, and there are papers written on these aspects. Over here, what it says is that we have a real self at any point in time. For example, at this point, I have a certain self. And then I have an ideal self, which is want to be progressing on the Quranic lines. And to the ideal self, which, for example, I will have or we will have, is to establish the system of deen and work for the system of deen. And ought self is someone else closer to us. For example, those who are not following the Quran, they would like us to go back to the same methods, the same religious belief system. For example, another example is a lady doctor having few children wants to become some kind of a specialist, and bringing up those children is her real self. Ideal self is to become a specialist. The ought self is, for example, her parents or someone else wishes her to look after the children and be a normal doctor rather than a specialist. So now it creates conflicts between real self, ideal self, and ought self. And we experience it throughout the world. For example, parents want their children to become something while the children have their own ideal selves in front of them. And the Quran makes our life very easy with that. It takes out the ought self. What it says is that you should have a real self at any point in time. You decide to come to the Quran and make your ideal self as following the attributes of Allah. Make Allah as your model, and then make effort to make your own self as ideal as possible by following those attributes in this life. We need some aim and goal in life. Generally, success in life is defined by the environment in which we are brought up. This is interesting because if we ask anyone around us, or if there are conversations between two people, you will see that straight away it will go to what they have achieved in their life, and it will go around on what is their status, what is their job, what is their family, how many children they have, and their house, their car, and they will use a lot of terms like mashallah, inshallah, alhamdulillah if they are Muslims, and if they are not Muslims, they will use their own terms prevalent in their own culture, and then that is the end of it. They will. I doubt it if anyone will say that hereafter will be part of the definition of their success in this life, or having Eimaan, or helping others, or the problems in the world and their solution. So their outlook is very myopic, very narrow, which is based on the narrow ends of the physical world. And this is important to notice because that gives us strength to figure out that how much more work is still required before we start thinking of the system of deen. Our desires seek some purpose in life. Mostly this purpose is related to the environment in which we are brought up, and that is called egocentric thinking. Human beings always think about their own interests. They are very much engrossed into their own vested interests. Next point is we are influenced by our family and environment. Being a social animal, we need other human beings, and those human beings then become our models. Our desires wish us to achieve our own aim defined by our desires. These aims in life, they keep changing as we live our life. We can justify any of our actions. Human beings want some model in life, be it parents, teachers, bosses, friends, celebrities, personalities from the past. Together with these, we also acquire religious beliefs, the veracity of which we seldom question. In fact, in case somebody questions them, they get annoyed with them and start labeling them. The important point to notice over here is that human mind cannot remain empty. It has to create some kind of a model for itself. Allah has taken certain responsibilities on himself in the Quran, and these are to be carried out by Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen in the world. This is an important point with which we should keep reminding ourselves that wherever there are problems, Allah is not going to interfere directly. It has to be done through human hands. And the Quran has explained it in many verses. So the point is that if these responsibilities, for example, Allah says that I provide sustenance to everyone, then if sustenance is not provided to everyone, we should look into it and find out the reasons that why human beings are poor. And if justice has to be done in the world, then we should look into it that why injustice is done in the world through other human beings. That means there is no Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen who can carry out those responsibilities on behalf of Allah. In fact, this aspect in itself becomes an evidence that Quran is from Allah. Because if human beings could find out guidance themselves and there was no need for the Quran, as some people say, then why there is so much injustice? And we have seen that in the human world, injustice can never be removed, poverty cannot be removed, because the people at the top are bent upon creating injustice and poverty in the world. The poverty in itself is injustice. So the exploitation which is going on in the world, it will never get eliminated. That means fear and huzn will never get eliminated, and hence the need for Quranic guidance. We need that precise concept of Allah which is put forward by the Quran for acquiring and developing ourselves. If we do not do this, then we cannot carry out the responsibilities. So when we come to the Quran and accept Allah as our concept, as model, then essentially we are taking over all those responsibilities and making a commitment to Allah that we will do it on your behalf. We are your companions. And that is why Quran says, Allahu waliyul lazina amanu yukhrijuhum minal zulumati ilan nur. That Allah is the companion of those who take on the responsibilities of Allah as noted in the Quran. And they are the ones then who come into the light of the Quran, and they benefit from the light of the Quran. Otherwise, our default position is of darknesses. And we have seen that how many darknesses are residing within the human mind, which is not guided by the Quran. Now, I've drawn a schematic over here of I and its relation with the permanent values. I and consciousness is the product of the brain. Intellect follows desires and emotions, conform to the majority, no external criteria to evaluate oneself, no higher aim of life, live life as if it ends with death. This is the concept of those who say that the life ends with death, and they are not willing to look at the human self and their own abilities of metacognitive abilities. Essentially what they say is that if brain is the one which is giving us consciousness, and if brain dies, how are we going to live once the brain is dead? Now, answer to this is provided in Surah 39, verse 42, where Quran says that when you go to sleep at night, your consciousness becomes suspended because brain has gone into rest to recuperate. And brain is the one which is used as a tool by I and our consciousness. And this is a complex issue, but the thing is that emergence of a developed self within us by following the Quran becomes an evidence of its own existence, of its own being an entity. And that is where the evidence lies for the hereafter. And this is an important point. So these people who say that the brain dead, we are dead, unless they come to the Quran and bring out that self, the potential for which exists within themselves, they will not be able to find the evidence of a self within their own self, which has the ability to go beyond physical death. And that is the important point. We should keep it in mind. And that is what we should explain to others when they are asking that what is in the Quran for us. Because it's a cost-benefit analysis. We only go to some kind of a book or what value system if we see a benefit in that. And that is why Quran also says that Allah has purchased the life and possessions of Mu'mineen in exchange for a life of paradise. So we are in a business. Life is a business. We do business all along with each other. The Quranic guidance, I plus its consciousness, and then Allah's attributes as a model, which serve as a model for this I and consciousness to develop, plus the permanent values, the environment in which it grows. So permanent values provide the environment in which I grows and then establishes the system of deen. So in a system of deen, the permanent values will be the constitution of that system, and those who are running that system will have their consciousness developed in the light of the divine attributes. So those divine attributes will be manifested by these consciousnesses or eyes who have decided to manage this system. Becoming aware of the values of the world and the environment in which I lives, whatever brain through mind, that is intellect plus desires plus emotions creates, I keeps analyzing it continuously and then acts within the domain of the permanent values. Over here, we should not go into those intricacies that how brain functions and left hemisphere and right hemisphere, what is their function, because that is not relevant to our talk or to understanding the Quran. Because Quran is dealing with our I as we know it, whether it is a product of the brain or that is mind, or where the consciousness resides within our brain, it is of no consequence. The fact is that we have an I, we have a consciousness, and we can manifest these attributes if we wish, and we know about the permanent values and how these permanent values become the constitution of the system of being. So all these things are very tangible. These are evidence-based, and we should stay within them as far as the Quran is concerned, but there is no harm in studying the constitution of the brain. There is a very good book by Ian McGilchrist, which has recently come out, who talks about the right hemisphere and left hemisphere, and he's got some YouTube videos as well. So any one of us who is interested can always watch those videos. Some limitations of the human intellect. Our intellect wishes to enhance our pleasures and minimize our pain in life. Most people think this is the purpose of life, i.e. to seek pleasure. However, the definition of pleasure is mostly very subjective and is relative, i.e. it varies from person to person. And we can check it as well. If we are happy at any point in time, after a while it just disappears and evaporates. And that can we put a price on that? These are just feelings, momentary feelings which come through the human beings. But fear and grief, which is a real environmental problems which exist, and we can put a value on that why these uncertainties are created in the world. For example, related to our job, related to death, related to the problems created by human beings or other human beings, problems of movement throughout the world, and the problem of injustice, poverty, exploitation, and all these are real issues of life. Our intellect helps us to find out the ways and means to fulfill our desires within the environment of the world in which we live. Since there is no inner guidance within us as we possess choice and intent, hence our desires, emotions, and ambitions drive our intellect. What is called conscience is internalized society, i.e. values of the society in which we live become our values. And we can verify it. Families have their own values, religious people have their own values. If they do something against their own belief systems, they become very guilty, and they ask for forgiveness as well. So these are very localized. Wherever we are living, that state or nation will have its own values, society will have its own values. So important thing is that there is nothing within us other than choice and intent. Rest are chains which we create ourselves. What we need to do is, if we keep Allah as a model, then all these things disappear and we understand them better as well. In fact, Quran helps us to understand every possible chain which human beings have created throughout the history and in the world of today. Intellect is aware of impending physical death in life, hence it wants quick results. It convinces us that our life ends with death. This is its default thinking. This is why we commonly hear, this is the one life I have. Intellect also pursues what it thinks is good for it. However, it has nothing inside which can guide it to right and wrong. In fact, right, Quran defines it very clearly and in a very direct way. Right is that which helps to develop ourselves. Remember what Allama Iqbal said. There are only two types of events in the world. One which help developing ourselves, the others disintegrated. And wrong is when our self becomes disintegrated. So we should keep focused on these aspects. it is influenced by the environment in which it is brought up and lives its life. So the point, this bottom line is that human intellect has no guidance within it. We desire something, and our intellect says that yes, you can achieve this desire. And if we are not aware of the law of requital, then there are no limitations put on this intellect. And if the intellect has the means, for example, power and money and wealth and possessions, then it will do it. And this is what is happening in the world. That is why the powerful nations go and bomb anyone at random, because they can do it. One important fundamental value: man must not be subject of another human being. Quran says, Summa ma'adraka ma yawmuddin. Again, what will explain to you what the era of deen is? Yawma la tamliku nafsun li nafsin shay'an wal amru yawma izin lillah. The era when no self shall have power on another, for the amr that day will be with Allah. Over here, Quran has made it very clear that since we possess divine energy, so we should not be ruled by another human being. So that means there should be still, if we are living together, we have to have some values and laws. And for that, Quran offers itself. It says that since you have divine energy and Allah has created you with a choice and intent, and you have an undeveloped self which can be developed, which has all the latent potentials kept in you and explained in the Quran. So if you follow, if you want the era of deen, you want deen in the world, then what you should do is follow the values given by the Quran, and in that way you will not be a subject of another human being, but you will accept Allah as a ruler, as a sovereign, and for your own benefit, because that is the way your self develops. It is like this, that if we drink water, our thirst will be quenched. So if our self needs to be developed to acquire an eternal life in the hereafter, then this is the procedure given by the Quran, and it is based on evidence. So over here, Quran says, in the system of deen, la tamliku nafsun li nafsin shay'an, no human being will ask another human being to follow his values. And what will happen is, wal amru yawma izin lillah, on that day, human beings will follow the values of the Quran. And we should keep in mind that we talk of the hereafter. What will happen in the hereafter? That will be Yawmuddin. That will be the era of deen in which Allah's laws will be applicable. And if we haven't even made an effort, not even thought of it in this world, how are we going to fit into that era of deen in the hereafter? If we don't accept Allah as sovereign, as our model, as guiding us in this life, and we don't like his values, we don't like his book, and in our own mind we think we have done great in this world, and then we land up in the hereafter, how are we going to fit into that world of the hereafter, which exclusively belongs to Allah? And that is something which we should keep it in mind. These are the facts which Quran is putting before us, and has given enough cognitive ability to understand these as well. If we don't want to understand, that is fine. But those of us who have come to the Quran, we should make all efforts to understand these issues in their finer details. 3 points to be noted here. The criterion for recognizing the era of deen: when no human being will be subjected to any man-made law, human element will be taken out completely. This is actually a degradation of us being human who possess divine energy, to be a subject, to be a slave of another human being. It should be a very uncomfortable for each one of us, particularly the students of the Quran. And we should think hard on this, that when Allah is offering his help, and if we do not put in our focused attention towards this, then there is something wrong with us. And that is the point which I'm trying to make over here, that we have to make a decision. Since we have come to the Quran, then forget about what others think. We should put in our best towards this. And secondly, over here, Quran also is making clear, if you remember, Quran has talked about shirk, which means contaminating our mind with others by associating them with Allah. For example, we also take some values of the Quran and some values from the man-made system. Then this contaminated mind cannot acquire those benefits which are associated with making Allah as an exclusive model before us. And that is why Quran calls it supreme injustice, because then we fail to get the advantages of this life as well. Those who do kufr, they are fully focused on this fact that the life will end with death. So they make concerted efforts because they know that whatever work they will do in this life, they will get the results of it. Whereas these people who contaminate their mind, they slow down. And that is why they will be lagging behind of those who do kufr. At the moment, we achieve a very high status in terms of cognitive understanding of the issues of life. In Deen, the command will be of Allah. Those possessing Quranic selves will manage the affairs of Deen on behalf of Allah. The Quran will serve as the constitution. By understanding the concept of Allah and then making it part of ourselves willingly leads to the emergence of the self which consciously comes to grips with the system of Deen described in the Quran. Human self, that is nafs, and recognition of its presence within us. Over here I've quoted two verses from Surah Al-Hashr. Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha wal tanzur nafsum ma qaddamat ligad wattaqullaha innallaha khabirum bima ta'malun. O mu'mineen, fear Allah, that is become muttaqi, and let every nafs see what he has sent forward for his tomorrow. That is, keep in mind the law of requital. See, to what extent Quran is asking us to be alive about the situation and about our own deeds and thought process. That every point in time we should be clearly seeing that what I am doing today, what impact it will have on my tomorrow. Be muttaqi by taking into account all attributes of Allah, for Allah is well acquainted with what you do. And Allah khabirum bima ta'malun also means that I should also be aware of what I am doing in my life. It's not, if Allah knows that what I am doing, which is inescapable, because huwa ma'akum aina ma kuntum, He is with us wherever we are. The issue over here is, am I aware of what I am doing? Am I aware of my own thought process? Next verse is وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. And be not you like those who forgot Allah and He made them forget their own self. That is their purpose of life. See, this verse, the first one is addressed to Ya ayyuhallazina amanu, those who have accepted Eimaan willingly. So this second verse is in the same connection, that don't forget the importance of your own self. Don't have an half-hearted attempt on yourself, because if you forgot the needs of your own self, then you will be wasting your life over here, because then Allah will of no help to you. You will forget the importance of your own self, because this self was there to work for the system of Deen. And you let the evil or the wrong system prosper because you did not think of developing your own self so that you become useful to the system of Deen. And that is something very important. Another point regarding over here, attaqullah is normally translated as fear Allah. Allah has clearly said that when you follow His laws, when we follow His laws, there is no fear and there is no husn. So attaqullah has a far bigger meanings than just fear Allah. What it means is that you should be very aware of the consequences of your thoughts and deeds in your life so that you avoid the pitfalls of life. So avoiding pitfalls of life is dealing with those suspicions and doubts and any fear which they create. Because if we are aware of the consequences of our wrong deeds, then we are not going to get anywhere near them. Now, the concept produced by the human intellect is subjective and is not the concept of one which exists externally, i.e., as an objective concept. All the concepts of gods which are existing in the world are subjective. These are created by human beings. As far as this fact is concerned, that God created the universe and the earth, which is fine. But then they go into portraying their own God as if He is the dictator, and the way He operates it, that in my life I can do whatever I like, but once it comes to the hereafter, then He should forgive me. And when Quran clearly says that Inna Allah khabirum bima ta'malun, it doesn't cross our mind, it doesn't cross the minds of religious people that if he is observing everything, the wrongs which we are doing and the world which we have created in the world, and we contribute to the wrong and injustice of this world. For example, we also do injustice if we are not doing anything about it and just staying aloof and becoming neutrals. We have to decide that which side we are, whether we are part of Hizbul Shaitan or Hizbullah. And this is something which is important, and we should keep it in mind when we are going through the Quran. What is Iman and why is so much emphasis put on it? ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب أقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون. This is verse 177 of Surah Baqarah. I'll go through its meanings. It is not there that you turn your faces towards east and west. There is the state of expanse or the width of our consciousness. And what Quran is saying is that consciousness you will never get by facing east and west, because facing east and west is a physical act, whereas consciousness is related to our cognitive abilities. But it is better to have Iman in Allah. See, very important over here that it is Iman in Allah which will expand the horizon of our consciousness, our understanding. The hereafter, because it is linked to that, we can't have Iman in Allah unless we have figured out that there is an accountability and there is another life as well beyond that. And it also implies that we have a self within us. So we recognize that self. The Malaika, which is the forces of nature, which are there to help us. The books, that is Allah's books, that is Wahi is consistent right from beginning till the revelation of the Quran. Allah always provided guidance to human beings wherever they were. Anbiya, those who brought this message and served as models for their people. If they could do it as human beings, all of us can do it. And despite having affection for wealth, very important point which needs our very focused attention, that why did Allah say, despite having affection for health? Who kept that affection and love for wealth within us? And that is the point which we should keep it in mind, that it is there at a basic level. And what we have to do is we have to go against it. And that is how bear comes. That is how the horizon of our self expands. And what do? Despite having affection for that, we recognize the needs of others. In a wrong system, what we do is to give it to near relations, the Tama, which is people who are left alone, Masakin, whose business of life has stopped, wayfarers, those who ask, very important, those who ask, those who become confined for some reason, then feel the need to establish salat and execute zakat, because we will come to this conclusion in the wrong system that never mind how much help we give them in terms of charity or otherwise, still the problem remains there, because the wrong system keep producing more yatama, more masakin, more people who are confined and subjugated to slavery. That gives us the aim to establish the system of salat and execute zakat, because that system should cater for the development of the self as well, and fulfill commitments as these should be fulfilled. See, these are the commitments which we create by studying the Quran ourselves. These are not the commitments which will be imposed from outside, because the Quran has clearly said, La ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in deen. It is all voluntary. And to stay firm and steadfast in hard times, and this path is not easy. It's an uphill task, Quran has said it, because firstly, we are going against the accumulation of wealth. And despite having affection for that wealth, we are going to share it with others, because people accumulate wealth not to share it with others. And during the periods of trial and tribulation, these are those people who manifest truth and those who are muttaqi. Say, the Quran has itself defined the term muttaqi when it says at the beginning that Quran is hudallil muttaqin, that it provides guidance for those who wish to become muttaqi. And in one verse, Quran has summed up everything for us as guidance. Note, Iman precedes Saleh deeds. This defines the scaling of human deeds. Over here, there is an interesting point which we should keep it in mind, that every deed which we do in the world, it is preceded by a thought. If we do not have Iman, then that deed, that thought will be finite, because we will be living life with this assumption in mind that the life ends with death. So all our thoughts will be finite because we do not have Iman. We don't think that the life will go beyond death. Whatever we will do will be related to this life only. And the deeds which we do, mostly those are emotive deeds because we react to some event around. For example, we have money, but we are not going to share it with others. But the moment there are floods, we become emotive. We feel some kind of a sympathy and empathy for them, and we take out a small amount and give it to them. Whereas that amount which we gave to help those victims of floods, that money was lying there. Why didn't we give it away to poor when those were also in need? Are we waiting for someone to be destroyed or injured through bombing or through earthquakes or through floods or for some accident, and then we will give it away? And these are the points which we should keep it in mind and to which Quran draws our attention. And this is how we will become a witness against our own selves. Because Quran says that nobody is dealt unjustly. It is injustice done by people to their own selves. And now coming to Iman, what happens is that when we acquire Iman in Allah, our thoughts become infinite, because now we have accepted this truth, this fact that the life goes beyond death. We have recognized the presence of our own self, and we have started developing it. And Saleh deeds, and these are noted over here. Saleh deeds are those which bring out the best from our own self. These potentials were there. Now we are manifesting those potentials in the outer world. For example, Allah is Rahman. We become Rahman within the human limits, and we become Rahim, and wherever possible we help others. We become Aziz, that we become powerful to stop evil in the world. That is why Quran says promote good as given in the Quran and forbid evil as noted in the Quran. So these are the way we should think over it, and this becomes scaling a qadar, that after Iman, our thoughts with which we do deeds become infinite, because now hereafter is inbuilt in our cognition, within our thoughts, within ourselves. I hope I have explained this point clearly. Now finally, to summarize the gist of the concept of Allah, we have seen that a human being is a complex entity possessing metacognitive potential which has the ability to create a new self, i.e. a sense of being. Since it has no inner guidance, hence he has to choose between two paths of life, i.e. the path of following his own desires and intellect, or the path of following life within the guidance of the Quran. This is the dividing line between two absolute opposite ideologies of life. The Quran calls it batil and haq. Batil is the one which creates destructive results, and decline is inbuilt within the man-made systems, because man-made systems are bound to decline, because human beings, as they live their life, because of the path they are following, they become worse and worse with the passage of time. Whereas in the system of deen, opposite takes place, because people following the deen are on haq, constructive results, so their system becomes better and better as long as they remain within the constitution of the Quran. In case he opts for the guidance of the Quran, then he has to recognize the presence of his own self and then create a need and desire to accept the concept of Allah based on the divine attributes. Only this concept can serve as a higher model for the human self. Acceptance of this higher self, i.e. Allah as a model, and then starting to manifest these divine attributes in oneself, is the beginning of the creation of a new life within us. The other part of this concept includes the other four constituents of Iman, for example, as noted in 177. It is worth looking at this verse 824, that is of Surah Al-Fal, where Quran says that Allah and His Messenger call you, invite you to that message, to that guidance which will give you life. As a consequence of acquiring Quranic Iman, the desire emerges to carry out salih deeds as noted in the Quran of Allah. This also leads to uniting hearts among those who come together for this purpose. And in this verse of Surah Al-Imran 103, Quran says, وَتَعْصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, that you should come together when you hold on to the rope of Allah, that is the Quran, and never let any differences come before you, because your aim is one. And if your aim is one and it is based on the development of yourself and Allah is your model, then how can there be differences if Allah is your model? It also includes understanding all those responsibilities which Allah has taken on Himself in relation to the rububiyyat of His creation, and which are to be carried out by Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen in this world. For example, verse 474. It's worth having a look on this verse. Over here, Quran is drawing the attention of Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen that what has happened to you, you are not going out to help those men, women, and children who are confined in a place and injustice is being done to them. The question is, why did Allah not help them directly? And this answers all those questions which arise in human minds, that what is Allah doing? What is God doing in this world and allowing all this misery, injustice, exploitation taking place in the world? Why the prayers of people go unanswered? It is because there is no Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen on this earth at this point in time. Without making this concept of Allah part of ourselves, we cannot be of any use to the system of deen. This is part of that makeup of a moment self which is required to perform those functions which Allah has termed as my servants. So we have to become His servants. We have to become His junior companions to carry out all those responsibilities which Allah has taken on Himself, and these are clearly spelled out in the Quran. قُلْ لِعِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا يُقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَيُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ. In this verse, Quran says that say to them that, O servants of mine who have opted to accept Iman, establish Salah, because that is how the injustice will disappear from the world. And يُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ, and part of that establishing the system is that whatever means of sustenance have been given to you, keep them open for the use of everyone, for the whole of mankind. Before coming to the end of this presentation, there is one point which I would like to emphasize, that when Quran says create a new life, we should look at the contents of our consciousness. Our consciousness, we have seen that in a world in which Allah is not a model, what happens is that our consciousness is occupied by all the successes which are related to the man-made system. But in the case of the Quran, once we accept Allah as a model willingly, and we come to this rational conclusion that it is for my own benefit and I want to volunteer to carry out those responsibilities which Allah has noted in the Quran, then essentially that means that Allah as a model occupies whole of our consciousness. And Allah is Hayyul Qayyum. He gives life and He Himself is living. And Qayyum means He is established with all His attributes. And with His being in our consciousness, that means we have now created a new life which is not going to go away. That will become part of our consciousness. That is what will give a new life to ourself as well. And now this new self, which we have created ourselves willingly by accepting Iman in Allah, becomes a seed, just like a seed of a tree or a fruit tree, which when provided the right environment grows and bears fruit. And the same will happen to our Iman, that it will grow and keep growing, and then others will join in, or we join with others, and we create a Jamaat. And this self then is the one which, through salih deeds, because salih deeds are those through which our latent potentials come out, that is the seed which we have sown within our consciousness, now will grow through solid deeds. And this is the point which Quran is making, is trying to convince us, or telling us that this is how you should create a new life within you. And if we can look at the verse 35:10 in Surah Fatir, verse 10, this all is very succinctly explained in that verse. And that is why Quran, right from beginning till the end, emphasizes on Iman and Amal Salih. Again, and it says that if you acquire Iman and do solid deeds, then you will yourself see that your life has reached a higher level of existence than the people who do not have Iman, and as a consequence will never do those solid deeds. And this becomes an evidence to our own self to remain firm on this path and remain on Sirat al-Mustaqim and get the assurance of the hereafter. So when we are working for the system of Deen, the assurance of the hereafter is inbuilt in that. It's not about individual salvation. The Quran is saying that after Iman and Amal Saleh, whatever you are achieving, this becomes part of yourself. Like even education over here in this world, once we get education and we get a degree, then that becomes part of ourselves. Nobody can steal it away. Nobody can take it away. So the evidence of a developed self becomes an evidence for itself. And that is what paradise is. And nobody can take it away. That is why Quran has said that whatever you achieve, that becomes part of yourself. And then you don't have to worry about your own hereafter. What you need to be concerned is system of being gets established and humanity becomes free from fear and huzn, which is created by man-made systems. Thank you very much, and thanks for your time and for sharing this presentation.